Williams is the second most successful team in Formula One history, with 9 championship victories between 1980 and 1997. And yet, if you were to have only watched Formula One in the last few years, you would struggle to believe that the team that was the worst on the grid recently could have ever been the best team in the sport. So what's happened to Williams, and can they get back to the front in the cost-capped era of Formula One? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. A period of dominance. The Williams team has a rich history in Formula One. Founded by Frank Williams and Patrick Head, they produced their first car from 1978. The team quickly found success, taking their first podium finish in that year, and then their first Grand Prix victories in 1979. The team were very quickly becoming one of the strongest teams in the sport, and in this era of Formula One, this was very possible. A key factor in this time was reliability, and in the first half of 1979 the team suffered 8 retirements over the first 7 rounds of the season. Looking into this time, it shows how different Formula One was back in the 70s and 80s. These days, F1 reliability is so good across the board that the teams are looking for hundredths of a second per lap, and a matter of 10 seconds or so over the race distance. This kind of performance requires the teams to have the latest technology, and all the teams are looking for the small efficiency gains, and the differences are minimal. This difference can easily be defined by looking at the gaps in qualifying. Back at the British Grand Prix in 1979, where Williams took their first ever victory, Alan Jones took pole position with a 1 minute 11.18. 10th position was 4.48% slower with a 1 minute 14.37, and the last successful qualifier was 8.63% slower than Jones with a 1 minute 17.32. This gap is quite significant, and it shows that the teams had a huge disparity, which was partly down to the reliability and partly down to the regulations at the time being quite open. Looking forward to today, in the latest Grand Prix in 2023 at the time of recording, Max Verstappen took pole position in Spain with a 1 minute 12.272. Piastri took 10th with a 1 minute 13.682, which is 1.95% slower than the pole sitter. Logan Sargent was the final qualifier with a 1 minute 14.699, which was 3.36% slower than the leader. This shows that the gaps between the drivers have shrunk over the last 45 years, and the nature of the sport has changed significantly since Williams first joined the F1 grid. From 1980, the Williams team became one of the strongest in Formula One. They proceeded to win the World Championship in 1980 and 1981, and developed a successful partnership with Honda later in that decade. It was quickly apparent that Williams was the new benchmark of Formula One. And by the end of the 1980s, Williams had won 4 Constructors' Championships and 3 Drivers' titles. This was a huge achievement for a relatively new independent team, and they became even more dominant in the 1990s. This is when Williams reached their peak. The team recruited a young Adrian Newey to join Patrick Head in the technical design department. The designs of the early 90s were strong, and the team won 3 Constructors' titles back-to-back between 1992 and 1994. It was an excellent performance and solidifying Williams' position as the team to beat in Formula One. During this time, the Williams team designed the most technologically advanced F1 car ever. The 1993 car was an evolution of the previous version, but the FW15C was built with active suspension in mind. The ride of the car could be changed with the push of a button from the cockpit, and the drivers could change the ride height at various points through the lap. This enabled the drivers to stall the diffusers down the straights to increase their straight line speed, and then ensure that they had the downforce required to be quick through the corners as well. The car could even automatically react to the loads through the suspension and adjust its rake angle on its own. This car was a technological masterpiece, and it was so advanced that it was banned for 1994. But the fact that Williams was the team to achieve this feat of engineering remained impressive, beating the likes of Ferrari and McLaren to be the best. The dominance of the team continued further with Constructors' Championships in 96 and 97. The team had changed the game through the 1990s and was seen as one of the best setups in the sport. But with the turn of the century came a change of fortunes for the Grove-based setup. But before we look at how the turn of the century changed Williams' fortunes, I want to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. We're working to bring you the best F1 content out there, and to be the first to see it, you need to hit that subscribe button. A 20th century team in the 21st century. Whilst Williams ended the 20th century as one of the most advanced F1 teams on the grid, it was expected that they would progress into the 21st century in similar fashion. But F1 was changing. The 1998 Concorde Agreement had a huge influence on the future of this sport. The agreements up to this point had been between F1 teams and the governing body, and in this new agreement, the commercial rights to Formula One were transferred to a separate third organisation. In doing so, the prize money distribution also fundamentally changed. Prior to this agreement, the team shared around 85% of the sport's revenues in their prize money. This distribution was beneficial for the teams. They would receive a large amount of money, which would allow them to invest in the team infrastructure and their cars. Following this change, the teams would receive a split of just 23% of the revenues, with the rest going to the commercial rights holder. This shift was significant, and very quickly the impacts of this change were seen across the teams on the F1 grid. With the reduced prize money, for the most part, the teams sold up to investors. Tyrrell became BAR in 1999, Stewart became Jaguar in 2000, and Benetton became Renault in 2002. These changes saw bigger names coming into the sport, and significant investment was a testament to the size and growth of Formula One as a whole. Soon after, the other independent teams in Jordan, Minardi, and Sauber would all struggle to compete and would eventually be sold or receive significant investment later in the early 2000s. The glaring standout during this time, though, was Williams. The team quickly became the final independent team in the sport, and while they did secure an engine partnership with BMW through the early 2000s, which ensured their security, the BMW brand opted to purchase the Sauber setup from the 2006 season, leaving Williams without a title partner and without an engine supplier. This loss for Williams resulted in some disappointing performances for the team. They achieved just 4 podium finishes over the rest of the decade, and they had well and truly dropped behind the other, more financially secure F1 teams. In addition, the other setups were beginning to change their approach to Formula One in efforts to compete. Several so-called B teams were appearing, with those setups purchasing as many parts as possible from partner teams. Through this time, the smaller teams on the F1 grid were becoming less independent and were in need of the financial benefits of partnering with the larger teams on the grid. The notable exception to this, once again, was Williams. Until recently, Williams built every part of their car themselves, aside from their power unit. This determined approach from the team is admirable, but has fundamentally resulted in the team falling further behind their rivals. Amongst this financial hardship, there were other issues quietly developing in the background. The first of these was the fact that the Williams technology and infrastructure was quickly falling out of date compared to the other teams on the grid. Fundamentally, the team were investing all of their limited income on their car, which meant that the larger investments that are needed alongside these things were missing. This is acceptable in the short term, but has drastic impacts longer term, which has been really exposed in 2023. The team has also shifted in the 2010s to bring in pay drivers. These would be people that would give the team financial benefit in return for driving their car. Pastor Maldonado was the first, but he would be followed by the likes of Lance Stroll, Sergei Sorokin, and Nicholas Latifi. All of these drivers are talented, and even Maldonado was the last Williams driver to actually achieve a surprise one-off race win back in 2012. But compared to some of the drivers that this team had seen in the past, such as Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and Nigel Mansell, pay drivers are simply not at the level expected for a team that could compete at the front of the grid. On the whole, the Williams team was a shadow of its former self heading into the 2020s, and the team that was so competitive so quickly when joining the sport was now a long way behind. The team was still fighting to maintain their independence, but this was clearly not working. The team scored just a single point in 2019, and then 0 points for the first time in their history in 2020. But things were about to change. Doralton Capital and the truth being revealed. Williams was one of the only independent teams left on the F1 grid when the COVID pandemic hit. It was a team that was struggling anyway, and the investment made by Doralton Capital to buy the team in 2020 gave them a lifeline and the opportunity to move back up the order in terms of their financial investment. Very quickly, the team appointed Jost Capito as the team principal, an experienced leader with a proven track record in rally car. This was a positive appointment, as despite the fact that he had limited F1 experience, he would still be able to make some significant changes in the team. The 2021 season saw Williams progress. With George Russell at the team, they were able to occasionally compete for points and even secured the team's first podium finish since 2017 with his second place in Belgium, even if that race didn't really happen. The team was clearly making good progress with the new leadership, and they were showing that their investment was working. This, combined with the new budget cap regulations that year, brought Williams much closer to their rivals. The real test for Williams, though, would come with the new regulations in 2022. The team was showing their potential to reach the midfield again or even get back to the front, given it was the biggest overhaul in regulations in 40 years. But this is where the team failed again. They finished the first season of these new regulations with just 8 points and firmly 10th in the constructors' standings. The team had gone backwards again, and the truth behind their situation was about to be revealed. After Capito's unexpected and sudden departure, James Vowles joined the team at the beginning of 2023. This was a good opportunity for the team to be compared directly to one of the best teams in modern Formula 1 in Mercedes. Vowles has been with Mercedes since it was Brawn GP, and so he'd witnessed the team's improvements and growth under Toto Wolff and how the team became so dominant through the turbo hybrid era. Vowles' assessment of the team has become increasingly clear in recent weeks. With the team continuing to struggle to compete, the new team principal has commented that he's amazed that the team can compete with facilities that are at least 20 years out of date. The team is still producing a car without the use of digital systems, which is an impressive feat in itself, considering they've still achieved some points in 2023. In addition, he's looking to transform the organisation in terms of their leadership and technical teams, with a restructure on the horizon for the team. The evidence of their challenge, though, was revealed over the Monaco and Spanish Grand Prix weekends. The Red Bull and Mercedes flaws were revealed when the crane recovered their respective cars. This has allowed teams to investigate their rivals, which may lead to updates in the future. But when Logan Sargent's Williams was recovered in Barcelona, the team's lack of development in this area was clear. Their floor looked bare compared to their rivals, with no channels to control the airflow under the car. Now, admittedly, the angles of these photos are significantly different and do not represent a fair comparison. But nevertheless, their floor was significantly less sophisticated, and it was evidence of how far behind this team is, and the fact that they are probably a long way from progressing up the order anytime soon. Not only this, but it's impossible for Williams to just copy the Mercedes or Red Bull floor designs, as they would need to take the time to copy the concepts, fabricate the designs, and test to see how they would work. It wouldn't necessarily be successful for the team to bolt on the new design and go faster. The evidence of the differences between the floors becoming clear was followed up in a video released by the new team principal from Williams. He was upfront and honest about the differences between his team's car and their rivals. This was a frank and honest conversation, which I believe is the right response for a team with a desire to improve. If they're open and honest about their challenge up to this point, they stand a good chance of actually making the improvements necessary to bring themselves back up the order again and regain competitiveness on the F1 grid. The journey back to the front will be a long one for Williams. They have a lot to improve, and despite the budget restrictions, they still remain well behind the rest of the teams when it comes to the overall budget. So making these changes will be more difficult for Williams. Fundamentally, something that James Vowles has brought from Mercedes is the fact that they are being more open and honest about their challenges. This is an indication that their culture is changing, and it is likely to bring significant improvements. But it will still take a long time to see those changes on track.